In this topic, we're going to cover closures. Before jumping straight into closures, let's first recap what a nested function and local variable is. Otherwise, this lesson will be very hard to follow. A function inside another function is a nested function. And a nested function has access to variables in the enclosing scope. We've already done this in the Python 101 for Hackers course, but let's just define a function with an inner function just to remember what happens. So let's first save this file, closures demo.py. We can define our function, print out a, and we'll say print outer format a, and this is our outer function. Now let's also define an inner function too, print in. And this is an inner nested function. And let's print inner dot format a. And notice that we didn't pass a here in as a variable because this inner function can already access the variable from the enclosing outer function scope. Let's call the function. And now let's print out test. Save this and execute it. And nothing too surprising here, right? We called the function, we printed from the outer function, we have the definition of the inner function here, and then we call that too. But what would happen if instead of calling the print function, what happens here if we would have returned this instead? So if we instead said return print in, let's save this and execute it. Oh, so we want to return the function here like this. And now what we can see is that now we only have the output from outer test because we're no longer directly calling the inner function. So let's instead bind this to an object, test2 equals print out test, and then calling it test2 as a function. And we can see that when we call print out with the value of test and bind the return value to the variable test2, when test2 is actually executed, we use the value of test2 that was originally supplied to the print out function. So that means when calling test2 here, the value was still remembered even though we had already finished execution of the print out function. And this output is quite strange, right? We called print out with test2 as the input string. The returned function was assigned to the variable test2. Then, when we called test2 as a function, the test2 input string was still remembered. In Python, this method of attaching data to code is called a closure. And a closure is a function object that remembers values in enclosing scopes even when that variable goes out of scope or even if it's removed. And so, for example, we can actually delete this function, delete print out, and still call the bound function test2 and execute this. And we can see that this executes without any errors because it's not necessary that the outer function exists in order for the nested function to execute because the data is already attached to the code. However, now we can't call the outer function again because it's been deleted. So we can't now say print out test2, Python tree syntax, of course. And we can see the error here, name print out is not defined, and that's because we've already deleted it. And so closures are useful when a nested function needs to reference a value in the outer scope. So for example, if we want to avoid global variables and instead use callbacks, or if we only have a few methods we want to implement in a Python class, then we could use a closure. But when using these closures, we need to make sure to have a nested function which refers to a value in the outer function and that the outer function returns the nested function, which is what we're doing here in this lesson. But that's it for now. And in the next lesson, we're going to cover an introduction to object-oriented programming in Python.